Daniel had been dreaming about this day for 2 whole years. 2 years of skipping takeout coffees, packing lunch instead of eating out, and saying no to weekend trips with friends. Every dollar he saved went into one account with one purpose: buy a cabin in the mountains, get away from the noise and stress of city life, finally have a place that was truly his. The cabin wasn't anything fancy. It was a small 2-bedroom A-frame tucked between tall pine trees, with a creaky porch and windows that needed new curtains. But when Daniel first saw it, something inside him just clicked. This was it. This was home. He'd closed on the property 3 weeks ago, and today was moving day. His best friend Rick agreed to help him move, which basically meant the two of them renting a U-Haul truck and doing all the heavy lifting themselves. They pulled up the gravel driveway at 9 in the morning, already sweating despite the cool October air. The trees were starting to turn colors and everything smelled like pine and fresh mountain air. Daniel felt like he could finally breathe for the first time in years. "Man, this place is perfect," Rick said, jumping out of the truck and stretching. "You're going to love it here." Daniel grinned. "I already do." They opened the back of the truck and started grabbing boxes. Daniel was carrying his first box toward the front door when he noticed someone walking toward them. Fast. It was a woman, probably in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back so tight it probably hurt. She wore a white pantsuit that looked like it cost more than Daniel's first car, and her face had that expression people get when they're about to ruin your day. "Stop right there," she called out, holding up one hand like a traffic cop. Daniel set the box down, confused. Can I help you?" The woman marched right up to him, her heels clicking on the gravel. "I'm Patricia Whitmore. I'm the president of the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. And you cannot move in here." Daniel blinked. Then he laughed because surely this was some kind of joke. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me." Patricia crossed her arms. "The previous owner never notified us about selling this property. We have a mandatory 30-day approval process for all new residents. You haven't been approved. Therefore, you cannot move in." Rick stepped up beside Daniel. "Dude, is she serious right now?" Daniel's smile faded. "Ma'am, I think there's been some kind of mistake. I own this cabin. I closed on it 3 weeks ago. Everything's legal and done." "That's irrelevant," Patricia said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "HOA bylaws supersede ownership in certain circumstances. You should have applied for residency approval before purchasing. Since you didn't, you're in violation." Daniel felt his stomach drop. He'd gone through every piece of paperwork with his lawyer. He'd checked everything twice. Nobody said anything about an HOA approval process. "My lawyer never mentioned any of this." "Then your lawyer wasn't very thorough, were they?" Patricia pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the other board members. We need to handle this immediately." Daniel stood there frozen, watching this stranger make phone calls about his property. His cabin. The place he'd worked so hard to buy. Rick looked at him with wide eyes. "Can she actually do this?" "I don't know," Daniel whispered. "I really don't know." Within 20 minutes, 2 more people showed up. First came a tall man in his 70s wearing an expensive watch and a permanent frown. Patricia introduced him as Douglas, the vice president of the HOA. Right behind him came a younger woman, maybe in her 40s, who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. Her name was Claire, and she was the HOA secretary. The 3 of them stood in a line between Daniel and his cabin door. It would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. "All right," Douglas said, pulling out a tablet and scrolling through something. "Let me see the deed." Daniel ran to the truck and grabbed his folder of documents. His hands were shaking as he handed everything over. The deed, the title insurance, the settlement statement. Everything that proved this cabin belonged to him. Douglas barely glanced at the papers before handing them back. "These don't matter. You violated HOA protocol. The bylaws are very clear on this, but I didn't know about any bylaws." Daniel's voice came out louder than he intended. "Nobody told me. How was I supposed to follow rules I didn't know existed?" Patricia smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "Ignorance isn't an excuse. The bylaws are publicly available on our website. You should have done your research." Claire shifted her weight, looking down at her feet. She seemed like she wanted to say something, but didn't. "Look," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Can we just talk about this? I'm sure we can figure something out. I don't want any trouble. I just want to move into my home." "That's not possible," Patricia said. "We've already made our decision. We're calling the police." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. The police? For what? Trespassing. Attempted unauthorized occupancy. Take your pick. Rick stepped forward, his face red. This is crazy. He owns the place. You can't just— We absolutely can, Douglas interrupted. And we are. Patricia, make the call. Daniel watched Patricia dial 911. He heard her tell the dispatcher that there was someone attempting to illegally occupy a property in their community. She made it sound like he was some kind of criminal trying to squat in an abandoned building, not a teacher who'd saved for 2 years to buy his dream home. After she hung up, the four of them just stood there. Daniel and Rick on one side, the HOA board on the other. The U-Haul truck sat between them, full of Daniel's entire life packed into boxes and furniture. Daniel pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called his real estate lawyer. It went straight to voicemail. Of course it did. It was Saturday morning. He left a message trying to explain the situation without his voice breaking. They said the police would be here in about 30 minutes, Patricia announced, checking her watch like she had somewhere better to be. 30 minutes. Daniel sat down on the back of the U-Haul truck, Rick beside him. Neither of them said anything for a while. What was there to say? This was supposed to be the best day of Daniel's life. He was supposed to be moving into his cabin, unpacking his stuff, maybe grilling something for dinner on the porch. Instead, he was sitting here waiting for the cops to show up and possibly arrest him. This can't be legal, Rick finally said. There's no way this is actually legal. I don't know anymore, Daniel replied. I thought I did everything right. I went through a lawyer. I checked all the paperwork. How did I miss this? Claire, the younger HOA woman, kept glancing at him. Every time he caught her eye, she looked away quickly. She seemed uncomfortable, like maybe she didn't completely agree with what was happening but didn't want to speak up against Patricia and Douglas. The minutes crawled by. Daniel tried calling his lawyer 2 more times, no answer. He thought about calling his parents, but what would he even tell them? He'd been so excited to share the news about the cabin. Now he might be facing trespassing charges. A terrible thought occurred to him. If he got arrested for trespassing, would that affect his teaching license? Could he lose his career over this? He'd taken early retirement to move here and focus on writing, but he still had his license. Still did some tutoring work. What if this ruined everything? Patricia and Douglas stood near the cabin door, talking quietly to each other. Occasionally, they'd look over at Daniel and Rick like they were something unpleasant that needed to be dealt with. Claire stood a little apart from them, checking her phone. Daniel stared at his cabin. His cabin, the place he'd fallen in love with the moment he saw it. The porch where he'd planned to sit with morning coffee. The windows where he'd imagined watching snow fall in winter. The trees where he'd hoped to hang a hammock and read books on lazy afternoons. All of it slipping away, because of rules he didn't know existed in people who seemed to enjoy wielding power over others. Rick put a hand on his shoulder. It's going to be okay, man. Once the cops get here and see your paperwork, they'll sort this out. Daniel wanted to believe that. He really did. But as he sat there on the back of that U-Haul truck, watching 3 strangers guard the door to his own home, he wasn't sure of anything anymore. All he could do was wait for the police to arrive and hope that someone would actually listen to him. The mountains around them were beautiful and peaceful. Birds sang in the trees. The wind rustled through the pines. It should have been perfect. Instead, it was turning into Daniel's worst nightmare. The waiting was the worst part. Daniel checked his phone every 30 seconds, even though he knew only 15 minutes had passed. Time moved differently when you were sitting on the back of a moving truck, wondering if you were about to get arrested for trying to move into your own home. Rick kept pacing back and forth, muttering about lawyers and lawsuits and how this whole thing was ridiculous. Patricia, Douglas, and Claire stood near the cabin entrance like guards at a castle gate. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were birds chirping and the wind moving through the pine trees, which felt wrong somehow. Nature shouldn't be this peaceful when your life was falling apart. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 25 minutes, Daniel heard it. The sound of tires on gravel. He looked up to see not 1 but 2 police cars making their way up the driveway. His heart started pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. This was really happening. The police were actually here. 2 officers got out of the cars. The first was a woman, maybe in her late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had kind eyes but a no-nonsense expression that said she'd dealt with plenty of difficult situations before. The second officer was an older guy, probably close to retirement, with gray hair and a tired look that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else right now. "All right," the female officer said, pulling out a notepad. "Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" Patricia didn't waste a second. She launched into this whole speech about HOA bylaws and approval processes and unauthorized occupancy. She made it sound like Daniel was some kind of criminal mastermind trying to steal a house. Douglas jumped in too, rattling off section numbers and code violations like he was reading from a legal textbook. Daniel just stood there, listening to these people describe him like he was a threat to the entire community. The female officer wrote things down in her notepad, her face completely neutral. The older officer, whose name tag read Bennett, just looked tired. When Patricia finally finished talking, Officer Rodriguez turned to Daniel. That was her name, Officer Rodriguez. He could see it on her badge now. "Sir, do you have any documentation showing you own this property?" "Yes, ma'am, absolutely." Daniel practically ran to the truck, grabbed his folder, and brought it back. His hands were still shaking as he handed over the papers. The deed with his name on it, the title insurance, the settlement statement showing he'd paid for the place. Everything that proved this cabin was his. Officer Rodriguez took her time looking through each document. She flipped pages slowly, reading carefully. Daniel held his breath. This was it. This would prove he wasn't doing anything wrong. After what felt like forever, she looked up at Patricia. "Ma'am, these documents look legitimate. He's the legal owner of this property." Relief flooded through Daniel's body. See, he wasn't crazy. He did own the cabin, but Patricia wasn't done. "The documents don't matter. Our HOA bylaws clearly state—" "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez interrupted, her voice still polite but firmer now. "We can't remove a property owner from their own home because of HOA approval processes. That's a civil matter, not a criminal one. If you have an issue with him moving in, you'll need to take it up through civil court." Patricia's face turned red. Like really red. "This is completely unacceptable. We have standards in this community. Rules that must be followed. You can't just let him—" "We're not letting him do anything," Officer Bennett said, speaking up for the first time. "He owns the property. He has every right to be here." Douglas tried a different approach. "Officer, surely there must be something in the law that supports HOA authority in situations like this. The bylaws exist for a reason." "The bylaws are a contract between homeowners," Officer Rodriguez explained, like she'd had this conversation 100 times before. "They're not criminal law. If he's violating your bylaws, you can fine him or take him to civil court. But you can't call us to remove him from property he legally owns." Daniel felt like he could breathe again for the first time in an hour. Rick was grinning beside him, clearly trying not to laugh at the expressions on Patricia and Douglas's faces. But then Officer Rodriguez did something unexpected. She stopped looking at the documents and started looking at Daniel. Really looking at him. Her eyes narrowed slightly like she was trying to remember something. "Wait a minute," she said slowly. "Are you Daniel Rivera? The teacher?" Daniel blinked, surprised. Yeah. I was a teacher. I just retired." "How did you—" A smile spread across Officer Rodriguez's face. A real, genuine smile that completely changed her expression. "You taught my nephew, Carlos Rodriguez, about 4 years ago at Lincoln High School." The name clicked in Daniel's memory. "Carlos, of course I remember Carlos. Smart kid, just struggled with the traditional classroom setup. Is he doing okay?" "He's doing amazing, thanks to you." Officer Rodriguez's whole demeanor changed. She wasn't just a cop anymore. She was someone grateful. Carlos was failing everything his sophomore year. His parents were worried he'd drop out. Then he got you as his math teacher and you completely turned things around for him. Daniel felt his face get warm. "I just helped him find a different way to learn. He did all the hard work himself." "You stayed after school with him 3 times a week for a whole semester," Officer Rodriguez continued. "You figured out he wasn't bad at math, he just needed to see it differently. He graduated with honors because of you. He's in his 2nd year of college now, studying engineering." Officer Bennett looked at Daniel with new interest. "You're a teacher?" Technically I still have my license. I took early retirement to move here and write. Maybe do some tutoring on the side for local kids who need help." Something shifted in the air. Claire, the younger woman from the HOA who'd been quiet this whole time, suddenly spoke up. You're a teacher? What grade levels? High school mostly. Math and science. But I've worked with middle school kids too. Really whatever they need help with. Claire's expression completely changed. She looked at Patricia, then back at Daniel. My daughter is failing algebra right now. Her grades have dropped so much this year and we can't afford a private tutor. I've been terrified she won't graduate. I'd be happy to help her, Daniel said without thinking. No charge. I just like helping kids learn. Really? Claire's eyes got watery. You'd do that? Of course, Douglas cleared his throat. Everyone turned to look at him. He looked uncomfortable, like he was about to admit something he didn't want to. I've been reading the bylaws on my phone. The 30-day approval process. It says it applies to renters, not owners. The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia stared at him. What? The approval process, Douglas repeated, not meeting anyone's eyes. It's for tenants. People renting properties. Not people who own them. We might have made a mistake. Patricia grabbed her phone and started scrolling frantically. Her face went from red to pale. That can't be right. It is right, Claire said quietly, also looking at her phone. I'm reading it too. Section 4, paragraph 2. We don't actually have the authority to stop an owner from moving in. Only renters need pre-approval. Daniel watched Patricia's face as the realization hit her. She'd been so sure, so confident, and she'd been completely wrong. Officer Rodriguez turned to Daniel with a kind smile. Looks like you're free to move in. No obstacles. No problems. Then she checked her watch. Actually, our shift ends in about 20 minutes. You need any help with those boxes? Daniel laughed in surprise. You're serious? Completely. I told my sister about you once. About how you helped Carlos when every other teacher had given up on him. She said if I ever ran into you, I should thank you properly. Helping you move into your new place seems like a good start. We could use the workout, Officer Bennett added with a grin. Been sitting in patrol cars too much lately. Rick laughed out loud. This is the weirdest day of my life, but I'll take it. Patricia stood there looking like someone had pulled the rug out from under her. Douglas looked embarrassed. But Claire was smiling. Actually smiling. I'm really sorry about all this, Claire said, walking over to Daniel. Patricia can be very intense, and I should have checked the bylaws more carefully before agreeing to call the police. That was wrong of us. It's okay, Daniel said, and meant it. The relief of not being arrested was enough to wash away most of his anger. It's not okay, Claire insisted. But if you really meant what you said about helping my daughter with algebra, could I maybe bring her by next week? I can pay you whatever the going rate is for tutors. Bring her by. We'll figure it out. And I meant what I said about no charge. Officer Rodriguez radioed in to dispatch that the situation was resolved. Then she and Officer Bennett parked their patrol cars and actually started grabbing boxes from the U-Haul. Daniel couldn't believe what he was seeing. 2 police officers still in uniform, helping him move into his cabin. Claire disappeared for a minute, then came back with her husband and teenage son. We're going to help too, she announced. It's the least we can do. Even Douglas, after standing there awkwardly for a minute, grabbed a box. My grandson is struggling with chemistry, he muttered. If you're really offering to help local kids, I know he could use it. Bring him by, Daniel said. The only person who didn't help was Patricia. She stood by her car, phone pressed to her ear, having some. Within an hour, Daniel's cabin had transformed from a crime scene into something that looked more like a neighborhood block party. Officer Rodriguez and Officer Bennett carried in furniture between radio calls. Claire's husband, whose name was Tom, turned out to be surprisingly good at figuring out where things should go. Her son Kevin kept making trips back and forth from the truck, earbuds in, nodding along to music Daniel couldn't hear. Rick pulled Daniel aside at one point, his eyes wide. Dude, did we just accidentally join some kind of weird mountain community cult? Because I'm pretty sure normal moving days don't go like this. Daniel laughed. I have no idea what's happening, but I'm not questioning it. More neighbors started showing up. Word traveled fast in Pine Ridge, apparently. A woman in her 50s came over from the cabin 2 doors down, introduced herself as Vanessa, and immediately started organizing Daniel's kitchen boxes by category. She had this matter-of-fact way about her that made it clear she was taking charge whether anyone asked her to or not. Heard there was some excitement over here, she said, unwrapping Daniel's coffee mugs. Patricia causing trouble again? Again? Daniel asked. Vanessa rolled her eyes. That woman has called the police on half the neighborhood at some point, usually for things like parking in the wrong spot or putting decorations up without HOA approval. We've all learned to just deal with her." She paused, looking at him curiously. "But I also heard you're a teacher who helps kids for free. Word really does travel fast here. Small community. Everyone knows everything within an hour." She smiled. "My son heard there's a teacher moving in. He's struggling in school right now. Math is killing him. Any chance you'd be willing to help?" Before Daniel could answer, she quickly added, "I can pay you. I know your time is valuable." "Bring him by," Daniel said. "We'll work something out." By the time Officer Rodriguez and Officer Bennett had to leave for their next shift, Daniel's living room furniture was all set up. Most of his kitchen was unpacked, and he'd somehow agreed to tutor 6 different kids from the neighborhood. Officer Rodriguez handed him her card before leaving. "That's got my personal number on it. If Patricia or anyone else gives you trouble, call me directly. Don't even bother with 911. You think there'll be more trouble?" Daniel asked. She glanced over at Patricia's car, still parked near the road. Patricia was sitting inside, visible through the windshield, still on the phone. "With Patricia? There's always the possibility, but something tells me you're going to be fine here. Carlos told me once that you had this way of seeing people for who they really were, not who everyone else said they were. I think that's going to serve you well in Pine Ridge." After the officers left, the work continued. Tom turned out to be handy with tools and fixed a loose board on the porch without being asked. Kevin helped Rick set up Daniel's bed frame. Vanessa had apparently appointed herself as the official kitchen organizer and wasn't stopping until every pot and pan had a designated spot. Claire came over holding a casserole dish covered in foil. "I made too much lasagna last night," she said, which was obviously a lie, but a kind one. "Thought you might be hungry after all this." "That's really thoughtful," Daniel said. "Thank you." She hesitated, then said quietly, "I'm sorry again about earlier. I should have stood up to Patricia. I knew something felt wrong about calling the police, but I didn't say anything because, well, Patricia is intimidating, and she's been running this HOA for 3 years like it's her personal kingdom." "It's okay," Daniel assured her. "Really, everything worked out." "It's not okay, though," Claire insisted. "My daughter Jenny, she's been so stressed about her grades. She cries almost every night because she thinks she's stupid, which she's not. She just needs help, and instead of thinking about kids like her, I was standing there trying to keep you from moving into your own home because Patricia said so." She looked close to tears. "That's not the kind of person I want to be." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. Before he could figure it out, Claire's phone rang. She looked at the screen and frowned. "It's Patricia. 3rd time she's called in the last hour." She declined the call. "I'm not dealing with her right now." As the afternoon wore on, Daniel started to relax. The panic and fear from earlier faded, replaced by something he hadn't expected. Hope. This place, these people, they were different from what he'd known in the city. Yes, there were people like Patricia, who seemed to enjoy making others miserable. But there were also people like Claire and Vanessa and Officer Rodriguez, who genuinely cared about their neighbors. Douglas approached him around 4 in the afternoon, looking uncomfortable. "My grandson, Tyler, he's failing chemistry. His parents are threatening to take away everything he enjoys until he brings his grade up, which is just making him more stressed and less able to focus." He cleared his throat. "I tried to help him, but chemistry has changed a lot since I was in school. I don't understand half of what he's studying." "How old is he?" 16, junior in high school. "Bring him by whenever works for you both," Daniel said. "Chemistry can be tough, but it usually clicks once you find the right way to explain it." Douglas nodded, still looking uncomfortable. I also wanted to apologize. For earlier. Patricia said you were trying to scam your way into the community, and I believed her without checking the facts. That was wrong of me." "It's forgotten," Daniel said. "No, it's not," Douglas replied, "but I appreciate you saying so." He pulled out his wallet and handed Daniel a business card. "I own a hardware store in town. You need anything for the cabin, come see me. I'll make sure you get a fair price." By sunset, Daniel's cabin was mostly unpacked and organized. Rick collapsed on the couch with a beer, looking exhausted but happy. "I'm never helping you move again, but I have to admit that was kind of amazing." Daniel sat down next to him, looking around his new home. Boxes were still scattered around, and he'd need to do some serious organizing later. But it was starting to feel real. He was actually here. This was actually his place. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He opened it to find a message from Claire. "This is my number. Jenny wants to know if you're free Tuesday after school to start tutoring. Also, welcome to Pine Ridge. We're really lucky to have you here." Another text came through, this time from Vanessa. "My son Brandon wants to meet you before he commits to tutoring. He's had bad experiences with teachers before. Can we stop by tomorrow? I told him you're different, but he needs to see for himself." Then one from Douglas. "Tyler is available Monday evenings or Wednesday afternoons. Let me know what works for you. Also, you mentioned you like to write. What do you write?" Daniel stared at his phone, watching the messages come in. 3 weeks ago, he'd been in his tiny city apartment, drowning in noise and stress. Now he was sitting in a mountain cabin surrounded by pine trees with neighbors who actually seemed to care about each other. "You good?" Rick asked. "Yeah," Daniel said, and meant it. "I'm really good." The next morning, Daniel woke up to the sound of birds instead of sirens. Sunlight streamed through his bedroom window, filtering through pine branches. He lay there for a minute, just breathing in the clean mountain air and feeling grateful that yesterday had ended so differently from how it started. He was making coffee when someone knocked on his door. For a second, his stomach clenched. What if it was Patricia here to cause more trouble? But when he opened the door, he found Vanessa standing there with a teenage boy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Morning," Vanessa said cheerfully. "This is Brandon. We brought donuts." Brandon was tall and skinny, with shaggy hair that fell over his eyes. He didn't make eye contact with Daniel, just stared at his shoes. "Hey," he mumbled. "Come in," Daniel said, stepping aside. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." They settled around Daniel's dining table. Brandon still wasn't making eye contact. He picked at his donut but didn't eat it. Vanessa gave Daniel an apologetic look. "Brandon's had some trouble with teachers at school. He's been labeled as a problem student, and once that happens, it's hard to shake it off." "I'm not a problem," Brandon said quietly. "The work is just boring." "You're not a problem," Daniel agreed. "And you know what? School is boring sometimes, especially when teachers are teaching to tests instead of actually making things interesting." Brandon finally looked up, surprised. "You're admitting school is boring?" "Parts of it, absolutely. I spent 8 years teaching in a system that cared more about test scores than whether kids were actually learning anything meaningful." It was frustrating. Daniel took a sip of his coffee. But math itself isn't boring. Math is everywhere. Music, sports, video games, cooking, building things. The way they teach it in school makes it boring. "That's what I keep saying," Brandon said, actually meeting Daniel's eyes now. "Like, why do I need to memorize formulas for things I'll never use?" "You probably don't need to memorize most of them," Daniel said. "But you do need to understand the concepts behind them. Because those concepts teach you how to think, how to solve problems, how to break down big questions into smaller pieces you can actually handle." They talked for over an hour. Brandon started asking questions, real questions about math and why things worked the way they did. Vanessa sat back and watched, tears in her eyes at one point, seeing her son actually engaged and in tea. The first tutoring session with Jenny happened on Tuesday afternoon. Claire brought her daughter by at 4 o'clock, and Daniel could immediately see the stress on the girl's face. Jenny was 15 with her mother's kind eyes but shoulders hunched like she was carrying the weight of the world. "I'm really bad at math," she said before she even sat down. "Just so you know, I've always been bad at it." "You're not bad at math," Daniel said, pulling out a chair for her. "You just haven't found the right way to learn it yet." "There's a difference." Jenny looked skeptical but sat down. Claire gave Daniel a grateful smile and said she'd be back in an hour. Daniel spent the first 20 minutes not doing any math at all. He just talked to Jenny, asked her about her interests, what she liked to do, what she wanted to study in college. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders started to ease. "I want to be a vet," she finally admitted. "I love animals. But you need good grades for that, and my algebra grade is tanking my whole GPA." "Okay, here's what most people don't tell you," Daniel said. "Vets use math constantly. Medication dosages, weight calculations, understanding lab results, managing a business. So you're not learning algebra because someone said you have to. You're learning it because it's actually going to be useful for what you want to do." Jenny blinked. "Really? Really? Let me show you." He grabbed a piece of paper and started writing out a scenario. A dog comes in weighing 50 pounds and needs a medication that's dosed at 0.5 milligrams per pound. How much medication does the dog need? Jenny worked through it carefully, and when she got the right answer, her whole face lit up. That's just multiplication. That's algebra, Daniel corrected gently. You just did algebra. You just didn't realize it because it was connected to something you care about. They spent the next 40 minutes working through problems, all of them related to veterinary medicine. By the time Claire came back to pick Jenny up, the girl was smiling. Actually smiling. How'd it go? Claire asked nervously. Good, Jenny said, and she sounded surprised by her own answer. Really good. Can I come back Thursday? After they left, Daniel felt that familiar warmth he used to get from teaching. The satisfaction of watching something click in a student's mind. This was why he'd become a teacher in the first place. Not for test scores or district requirements, but for moments like this. Wednesday afternoon brought Tyler, Douglas's grandson. Tyler showed up looking sullen and angry, clearly forced to be there by his parents. He slumped in the chair and pulled out his chemistry textbook like it was a weapon he wanted to throw. My parents think I'm stupid, he said flatly. That's why I'm here. Are you stupid? Daniel asked. Tyler looked up surprised. What? Are you stupid? Do you think you're stupid? I mean, I'm failing chemistry, so probably. That's not what I asked. I asked if you think you're stupid. Not if you're failing a class. Those are two different things. Tyler was quiet for a moment. No, he finally said. I don't think I'm stupid. I just think chemistry is impossible. It's not impossible, Daniel said. But the way they teach it in high school makes it feel that way. Let me ask you something. Do you like to cook? Tyler shrugged. I guess. I make pretty good pancakes. Pancakes are chemistry, Daniel said. The way flour and eggs and milk combine when you mix them. The way heat changes the proteins and creates air bubbles. That's all chemical reactions. You're literally doing chemistry every time you cook. For the first time, Tyler looked interested. Seriously? Seriously. Chemistry isn't just stuff in test tubes. It's everything around you. Let's start there and work backward to what your textbook is trying to teach you. By the end of their session, Tyler was taking notes voluntarily and asking questions. When Douglas came to pick him up, his grandson was actually explaining a concept about molecular bonds using a pancake analogy. Douglas pulled Daniel aside. I don't know what you did, but thank you. That's the first time I've seen him engaged with schoolwork in months. He's a smart kid, Daniel said. He just needed to see why it mattered. Thursday brought more students. Word had spread through the community faster than Daniel could have imagined. Brandon came back with a friend. Jenny brought a classmate who was also struggling. Vanessa's neighbor asked if Daniel could help her daughter with reading comprehension. Daniel's cabin started to feel less like his private retreat and more like a community center. His dining table was constantly covered with textbooks and notebooks. His living room became a study space. Students came and went throughout the afternoons and evenings. He loved it. Every minute of it, but not everyone was happy about the changes. On Friday evening, Daniel found a letter in his mailbox. Official HOA letterhead, Patricia's signature at the bottom. The letter informed him that he was in violation of multiple HOA bylaws, running a business from a residential property, excessive traffic, noise complaints, operating without proper permits. The letter ended with a threat. Fix these violations within 30 days or face daily fines of $200. Daniel read the letter twice, feeling his good mood evaporate. He'd been so focused on helping the kids that he hadn't thought about HOA rules. Was tutoring considered running a business? He wasn't charging anyone, but would that matter? He called Claire, who answered on the first ring. Did you get a letter from Patricia? Yeah, Daniel said. Just now. She sent the same thing to 4 other people in the neighborhood. All people who've been publicly supportive of you. Claire sighed. The HOA meeting on Sunday was horrible. She's on a warpath. She tried to get the board to vote on forcing you out, but the vote failed. So now she's targeting anyone who's helping you. This is my fault, Daniel said. I'm bringing trouble to people who were just being kind. Don't you dare think that way, Claire said firmly. Patricia has been a nightmare for years. She's just using you as an excuse to flex her power again. We're having another board meeting next week, and several of us are planning to call for a vote of no confidence against her. Will that work? I don't know. But we have to try. This community deserves better than her. Daniel spent the weekend worrying and researching HOA laws. He found out that the rules varied by state and by the specific HOA bylaws. Some of Patricia's claims seemed questionable. Noise complaints when his students were usually gone by 8 p.m. Excessive traffic when most families only came once or twice a week. Monday morning, his doorbell rang early. He opened the door to find Officer Rodriguez standing there out of uniform. "Hope I'm not bothering you," she said. "I'm off duty today. Mind if I come in?" "Of course." Daniel stepped aside, confused. Officer Rodriguez sat at his dining table, the same table where he'd been helping students all week. "I heard about Patricia's letters. She filed formal complaints with the police department, too, claiming you're running an illegal business and disturbing the peace." Daniel's heart sank. "Are you here to shut me down?"
"No," she said with a small smile.
"I'm here to tell you that I reviewed all her complaints and there's nothing illegal about what you're doing. You're not charging money, so it's not a business. The excessive traffic is normal neighborhood activity, and the noise complaints are completely unfounded. I personally drove by here 3 nights last week around 7 p.m., and it was quieter than most houses with families." Relief washed over Daniel. "So I'm okay?" "You're fine. But Patricia isn't going to stop. She's feeling threatened because you've done in 2 weeks what she hasn't done in 3 years. You've brought this community together." Officer Rodriguez leaned forward. "People are talking about how their kids are doing better in school, how they're less stressed, how they're actually excited to learn. That's powerful. And people like Patricia hate seeing someone else do something good because it highlights their own failures. I just wanted to help some kids," Daniel said quietly. "I know, and that's exactly why people are rallying around you." She stood up to leave. "Just keep doing what you're doing. Document everything. Keep records of who comes when they come, how quiet you keep things. If Patricia tries to take legal action, you'll want that documentation." After she left, Daniel started a simple spreadsheet. Student names, subjects they were working on, times they arrived and left. He also started asking parents to text him when they arrived and when they left, creating a digital paper trail. Tuesday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Patricia herself showed up at his door alone this time. No Douglas or Claire as backup. "We need to talk," she said. Not a request, a demand. Daniel considered closing the door in her face, but instead he stepped aside. "Come in." Patricia walked into his cabin, her eyes scanning everything like she was searching for violations. She looked at the textbooks on the table, the math problems written on his whiteboard, the comfortable chairs he'd arranged in a circle for group discussions. "You're disrupting this entire community," she finally said. "I'm helping kids learn. You're undermining the order we've worked hard to establish. People are questioning my authority. The board is talking about removing me." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and for a second, Daniel saw something other than anger in her face. Fear, maybe, or sadness. "Maybe they're questioning your authority because the way you lead isn't working," Daniel said carefully. "Communities aren't supposed to be about control and rules and making sure everyone stays in line. 3 weeks after Daniel moved into Pine Ridge, the community held its monthly HOA meeting. Daniel hadn't planned to attend, but Claire insisted. "You need to be there," she told him over the phone. "We're voting on Patricia's leadership tonight. People need to see you. They need to remember why we're doing this." So Daniel found himself walking into the community center that evening, nervous energy thrumming through his body. The room was packed. Way more people than usually came to these meetings, according to Claire. Neighbors Daniel recognized filled the chairs. Vanessa and Brandon sat near the front. Douglas was there with Tyler, Jenny and her mom, Tom and Kevin. Even Officer Rodriguez had shown up out of uniform. Patricia sat at the front table, her back straight and her face carefully neutral. But Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the edge of the table a little too tightly. Claire called the meeting to order. They went through the usual business first. Budget reports, maintenance schedules. Someone complained about a broken streetlight. Normal stuff. But everyone in the room knew what they were really there for. Finally, Claire took a deep breath. "We have one more item on the agenda. A vote of no confidence in our current HOA president, Patricia Whitmore." The room went completely silent. "Before we vote," Claire continued, "I think we need to discuss why we're here. Over the past few weeks, several community members have received letters threatening fines for supporting our newest neighbor. Letters that cite violations that don't exist or grossly exaggerate normal community activity." Douglas stood up. I've been on this board for 5 years. I've watched Patricia become increasingly focused on control rather than community. I supported her at first because I thought she was preserving her husband's vision. But I've realized that what we've been preserving isn't community. It's fear. Fear of stepping out of line. Fear of being different. Fear of change. Vanessa raised her hand. My son was failing school. Actually failing. He came home crying because he thought he was stupid. Then Daniel moved in, and within 2 weeks, Brandon's grades started improving. Not because of some miracle, but because someone finally took the time to see him as a person instead of a problem. Her voice got louder. And Patricia tried to fine me for the crime of letting my kid get help with his homework. One by one, people stood up and shared their stories. Parents whose kids were doing better in school. Neighbors who'd felt isolated until the tutoring sessions started bringing people together. Tom talked about how the community used to feel cold and unwelcoming, like everyone was afraid to step outside their own property lines. Now my son volunteers to help younger kids with their homework, Tom said. He comes home talking about the study groups, about feeling like he's part of something. That's what community is supposed to be. Patricia sat through all of it, her face growing paler with each testimony. When the comments finally ended, Claire turned to her. Patricia, would you like to respond? For a long moment, Patricia just sat there. Then she stood up slowly, like it hurt to move. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than Daniel had ever heard it. My husband, Richard, loved this community more than anything except me. When he died 3 years ago, I thought if I could just keep everything the way he'd left it, I could keep him alive somehow. The rules, the standards, the order. It was all I had left of him. She paused, and Daniel could see tears in her eyes. But I was wrong. Richard didn't love this place because of the rules. He loved it because of the people. Because neighbors helped each other. Because kids played in the streets and families had barbecues together. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. I turned his legacy into something he would have hated. Patricia looked directly at Daniel. You did in 3 weeks what I couldn't do in 3 years. You reminded people what community means, and instead of being grateful, I tried to destroy it because it made me feel like a failure. She turned back to the board. I'm withdrawing my name from consideration as HOA president. Claire, you should lead. You actually care about these people. I just cared about control. The room erupted in murmurs. Claire looked shocked. Douglas looked relieved. Patricia gathered her papers and walked toward the door. Wait, Daniel heard himself say. He stood up, not sure what he was about to say, but knowing he needed to say something. Patricia, you don't have to leave. She turned around, surprised. This community needs all kinds of people, Daniel continued. Yes, it needs people like Claire who bring us together. But it also needs people who understand the practical stuff, the budgets and maintenance, and yes, even some rules. Just maybe not as many rules, and maybe enforced with a little more heart. Patricia stared at him. You're defending me? After everything I did? I'm saying that people can change. I'm saying that mistakes don't have to define us forever. Daniel thought about all the students he'd worked with over the years. Kids who'd been labeled as troublemakers or failures. Who just needed someone to see past the label. You admitted you were wrong. That takes courage. Don't waste that courage by running away. Vanessa stood up. He's right. Patricia, you've been horrible. Let's not pretend otherwise. But you also know more about how this HOA actually functions than anyone else here. Maybe you could help Claire as an advisor? No power, just knowledge, Douglas nodded. The Patricia who called the cops on Daniel needs to go. But the Patricia who kept this community's finances organized and made sure our roads got plowed in winter, we could use that person. Patricia looked around the room, seeing faces that weren't angry anymore. Just tired. Tired of conflict, ready to move forward. I'd need to make real changes, she said quietly. Not just say I'm sorry, but actually do better. Then do better, Claire said simply. Help me lead this community the right way. Not as president, but as someone who genuinely wants to help. The vote that night wasn't about removing Patricia anymore. It was about restructuring the HOA board to be less about control and more about community support. Claire became president. Douglas stayed on as treasurer. And Patricia, after a long pause, accepted a position as community coordinator, with the specific responsibility of helping neighbors connect with resources they needed. After the meeting, people didn't rush home like usual. They stood around talking, laughing, making plans. Tyler was explaining chemistry concepts to Brandon, who was actually listening. Jenny and Kevin were comparing notes about their college plans. Tom and Douglas were discussing a community barbecue for the following month. Patricia approached Daniel on his way out. "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you a debt I can never repay." "You don't owe me anything," Daniel said. "Just help Claire make this place what it should be." "I will." She hesitated. "My grandson Nathan is coming to live with me next month. His parents are divorcing and he's angry about it. Acting out in school. I don't know how to help him." "Bring him to see me when he arrives," Daniel said. "We'll figure it out together." Patricia's eyes filled with tears again. "Thank you. For everything. Including seeing me as more than just the villain." 2 months later, Pine Ridge looked completely different. Not physically, the cabins and trees were all the same. But the feeling of the place had transformed. Daniel's cabin had officially become the community learning center, with scheduled hours and a sign-up sheet. Students came and went throughout the week. Carlos, Officer Rodriguez's nephew, drove up from college on weekends to help with the younger kids. Even some of the parents started attending sessions, working on their own education goals. Patricia's grandson Nathan had moved in and was slowly adjusting. He was angry, yes, and struggling with the divorce, but he'd started coming to Daniel's 3 times a week, and the anger was gradually giving way to something else. Curiosity, hope, connection. Patricia herself had thrown herself into her new role with unexpected passion. She organized a community garden, set up a tool-sharing program so neighbors didn't have to buy equipment they'd rarely use, started a meal train for families going through hard times. She was still organized and detail-oriented, but now those traits were being used to help people instead of control them. On a cold December evening, the community held its annual holiday gathering. This year it was at Daniel's cabin. Somehow his small 2-bedroom A-frame managed to fit 40 people, all crammed into every available space. Carlos was demonstrating a science experiment to a group of fascinated kids. Jenny was practicing her college entrance essay out loud, getting feedback from neighbors. Tyler and Brandon were teaching some younger students a math game they'd invented. Nathan sat with Patricia, both of them working through an English assignment together. Patricia asking questions instead of giving answers. Officer Rodriguez raised a glass of hot cider. "I want to make a toast. To Daniel, who came to Pine Ridge looking for peace and quiet, and instead reminded us all what it means to be a community." "To Daniel," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Rick, who'd driven up for the party, leaned over and whispered, "Not exactly the peaceful retirement you planned, is it?" Daniel looked around at the faces filling his cabin. Students who'd found confidence. Parents who'd found support. Patricia, who'd found redemption. Claire, who'd found her voice. Douglas, who'd found the courage to stand up for what was right. All these people who'd become so much more than neighbors, he